And then we had a hearing on Monday, and we went to court and we explained to the judge what was going on and how this was all working. And fortunately, the judge was fair and he was kind and he was sympathetic, and he said, you know what? No, you can't stop their sale. Keep it going.
There is a version of this story that the internet already thinks it knows. Two guys from Utah, a TV show about diesel trucks, some lawsuits, an arrest, and a divorce. People read the headlines, filled in the gaps with assumptions, and moved on. But assumptions are a dangerous thing when the real story is sitting right underneath them, quieter and heavier than anything the tabloids captured, because what actually happened between Heavy D and Diesel Dave is not a simple falling out. It is not a betrayal story. It is not a rivalry disguised as a friendship. What it actually is, once you sit with the timeline and stop reaching for the dramatic version, is something more human and more complicated than most people are willing to sit with. It is the story of two men who built something real together, watched it grow beyond anything they originally imagined, and then found themselves on completely different sides of a collapse they both saw coming but neither could fully stop. And now, for the first time, the full picture is starting to come together. Not through a press conference. Not through a sit-down interview on a major network. But through the accumulation of public statements, documented timelines, court records, and the kind of silence that speaks louder than any explanation ever could. So let's start from the beginning. Not the beginning the show gave you, but the real one. Dave Sparks and Dave Kiley did not meet on a television set. They did not meet through an agent or a casting call or a pitch meeting. They met the way most genuinely meaningful connections happen, accidentally, in an ordinary room, with no cameras anywhere nearby. According to biographical information tied to Dave Sparks, the two crossed paths at a church singles event in Utah, a night neither of them likely remembered as significant until later, when everything that followed made the moment worth looking back on. What they discovered that night was not just a shared hobby. It was a shared language. Both of them thought about diesel engines the way other people think about their careers, their identities, their entire orientation toward the world. Dave Sparks had already walked away from Weber State University after a single semester, according to publicly available biographical records, not because he failed, but because nothing in the classroom was pulling at him the way a diesel engine could. Dave Kiley, the man who would become Diesel Dave, was already deep inside that same culture. When they started talking, they were not making small talk. They were comparing notes on something they had both been living alone for years. They opened a repair shop in Woods Cross, Utah, and that garage became the real origin story. Not the show. Not the merchandise. Not the Discovery Channel deal. The garage. Two men working on trucks late into the night, testing ideas immediately instead of discussing them, building something with their hands because that was the only way either of them knew how to think clearly. There were no investors in the early days. No strategy meetings. No brand consultants. Just the work, the engines, and a camera. They eventually started pointing at themselves because what they were doing was genuinely hard to believe unless you watched it happen. The YouTube footage came first. Wild builds, trucks being pushed past their design limits, the kind of mechanical chaos that most professional shops would refuse on liability grounds alone. But people watched. Then more people watched. And somewhere in that accumulation of attention, the Discovery Channel came calling. By January 2016, Diesel Brothers was a television show, and two mechanics from Utah were suddenly being broadcast into millions of living rooms across the country. The show ran for 7 seasons. That is not a small number. 7 seasons of chemistry, of builds that grew more ambitious every year, of a friendship that looked completely effortless on camera. The audience loved them because they seemed unbreakable. Two guys who genuinely liked each other, doing the thing they genuinely loved, with no visible gap between who they were on screen and who they were in real life. But here is what nobody talks about when they describe that run. Effortless chemistry on screen does not mean effortless pressure behind it. Every season that succeeded added weight. Bigger budgets meant bigger expectations. More viewers meant more scrutiny. A brand that once existed inside a small Utah garage was now a commercial enterprise, with merchandise lines, sponsorships, social media obligations, and legal exposure that neither of them had been trained to navigate. The garage could absorb chaos. An empire could not. The first sign that something was structurally wrong did not come from inside the partnership. It came from outside, and it arrived in the form of a lawsuit that nobody in the Diesel Brothers world saw coming quite the way it landed. In 2017, Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment filed a federal lawsuit alleging that emission systems were being disabled on trucks modified for the show. The practice being described, commonly associated with rolling coal, involves tuning diesel engines to produce heavy black exhaust as a performance effect. For the physicians behind the lawsuit, this was not entertainment. It was documented air pollution being broadcast to millions of viewers, and according to court filings and legal summaries tied to the case, footage from the show itself became part of the evidentiary record. Think about what that means for a second. Every dramatic rev, every cloud of black smoke captured on camera for audience impact, was simultaneously building a legal case against the same people producing it. The show's content and the lawsuit's evidence were drawing from exactly the same source material. By 2018, a federal injunction was already in place. A U.S. District Court order restricted further modifications that violated the Clean Air Act, the federal environmental law governing vehicle emission standards and enforced by the Environmental Protection Agency. But according to court records and legal summaries, the legal pressure did not stop there. The case continued moving through the system, and by 2020 the financial consequences had become concrete. Penalties totaling over $760,000 were paid to the United States government, with an additional $90,000 going to Davis County. The following year, nearly $929,000 in legal fees were awarded to the Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment. The appellate court, in describing the conduct at issue, used language that is not typical for regulatory disputes. The phrase flagrant misconduct appeared in the court's characterization of what had taken place. That kind of language does not show up in cases built around good faith misunderstandings. It shows up when a pattern of behavior continues past the point where it could be explained as accidental. And while all of this was unfolding inside the legal system, a completely separate lawsuit was developing on an entirely different front. Diesel SPA is an Italian fashion company with more than 50 years of history built around a single brand name. When the Diesel brothers built their merchandise operation, Diesel Power Gear, around the same word, they were entering a legal territory they had apparently not fully mapped. According to litigation reporting covered by Bloomberg Law, Diesel SPA filed a trademark infringement case arguing that the use of diesel in the merchandise branding was creating confusion in the marketplace and drawing on the fashion company's established name without authorization. What started as a branding dispute escalated into a full federal trademark trial that in 2023, the court ruled against the Diesel brothers' business entities. The judgment came in at $11,800,000 in damages awarded to Diesel SPA. The original award request had been around $59 million, but the judge reduced the figure substantially, describing the initial amount as excessive. Even reduced, $11.8 million layered on top of the environmental penalties and legal fees from the Clean Air Act case pushed the total legal exposure, as summarized across media coverage of the combined cases, toward approximately $13 million. At that scale, you are no longer looking at a series of separate legal problems. You are looking at a pattern. Environmental compliance, intellectual property, federal court orders, 3 different categories of law, 3 different sets of plaintiffs, all arriving at the same destination. And through all of it, the show kept running, the brand kept operating, and the public version of the Diesel brothers story kept moving forward as though none of the machinery underneath it was breaking down. Here is the part of the story that most people got wrong when it finally became public. When the Diesel brothers left the Discovery Channel in 2023 after 7 seasons, the assumption in most media coverage was that the partnership had cracked. That Heavy D and Diesel Dave had a falling out, that the show ended because the friendship ended, that the public split was the cause of the departure. That reading is inaccurate. According to publicly available statements and documented timelines, both men agreed to step away from Discovery Channel production together, choosing to move toward independent content on YouTube rather than continuing under a network structure. The decision was mutual. The departure was not a symptom of internal conflict, it was a shared choice made by 2 people who had been building something together for years and wanted to control more of what they built. The split came later. And it did not come from a single conversation or a dramatic confrontation. It came from the weight of what was happening outside the partnership pulling one of them in a direction the other could not follow. By October 2025, the legal situation had reached its most acute point. U.S. Marshals arrived at the shop in Utah and arrested Dave Sparks for contempt of court, connected to failure to comply with financial penalties totaling over $843,000, according to court coverage and arrest reporting from that period. The man who had built an entire public identity around controlling machines, around mastering chaos, around being the guy who could fix anything, that man was now being escorted out of his own shop under federal enforcement. After the arrest, Dave Kiley went silent publicly. No joint appearances. No statements. No continuation of the rhythm they had maintained together for years in front of an audience. The silence was not hostile. It was not the silence of 2 men at war. It was the silence of someone watching a situation that had already moved past the point where words could help, and choosing not to add noise to something that was already loud enough. Dave Sparks has not walked away from the public record during this period, even as the circumstances around him became increasingly difficult. In video content and statements made prior to and following the arrest, he has described the legal situation as something he intends to work through, not walk away from. His language, across multiple documented appearances, reflects someone who understands the severity of what has accumulated but is not framing it as the end of the story. The pivot toward clean energy, specifically the acquisition of rights connected to the cancelled Nikola Badger hydrogen electric pickup project in February 2024 and the subsequent development of EMBBR motors, represents something more than a business move. It represents a man who looked at the direction the diesel industry was facing and decided that the most interesting version of what he could build next was on the other side of that line. According to reporting on the Nikola Badger project's development history, the vehicle had originally been announced with genuine industry attention before Nikola Corporation's collapse ended the project. Heavy D's acquisition of those rights and the launch of EMBBR motors placed him inside a clean energy space that, on the surface, looks like a complete reversal of everything Diesel Brothers stood for, but it is not a reversal. It is an evolution that makes sense if you understand what drove the original work. The appeal was never exclusively about diesel fuel. It was about engineering limits. About pushing machines past what most people thought they were capable of. Hydrogen systems and electric vehicle development offer the same challenge in a different medium. Whether the venture succeeds financially is a separate question from whether the instinct behind it is genuine. Based on what Heavy D has said publicly about the direction of EMBBR motors, the instinct appears genuine. Dave Kiley's response to everything that has unfolded has been to keep doing what he was already doing. According to Monster Jam coverage and vehicle documentation, he has continued driving the Brodozer into 2026, powered by a Cat C13 engine, still performing for live audiences, still carrying the identity that he and Heavy D built together even though Heavy D is no longer beside him in it. That choice says something. It says that Diesel Dave did not need the partnership to collapse for him to know what he valued. He knew what he was doing before the show, during the show, and after it. The trucks, the performance, the culture, that was always his, as much as it was ever shared. What he lost was not his identity. What he lost was the person he shared it with. And that distinction matters when you are trying to understand what actually happened between them. This was not a story about two people who discovered they wanted different things. It was a story about two people who wanted the same things and then found themselves on different sides of a legal and financial collapse that neither of them fully controlled. The divergence was not ideological. It was circumstantial. And circumstantial splits are often the hardest to explain because there is no villain in them. There is just pressure, timing, and the particular way consequences land on individuals rather than partnerships.